Welcome back to UGC Net English class. In the previous class, we talked of one of William Shakespeare's plays, All's Well That Ends Well. With today's lecture, we are going to discuss the biography of the famous Renaissance period English writer, Sir Philip Sidney. Sir Philip Sidney was born in 1554 and he passed away in 1586. So Philip Sidney can be called a true Renaissance man. He was an English poet, courtier, scholar and soldier. So Philip Sidney was the embodiment of an ideal Renaissance man because he excelled in all the soldier activities, the courtier activities, and also he proved that he was a good scholar. This is why he is called a true Renaissance man. Philip Sidney's name, the first name, Philip, in a Greek language means love of horses. Philip denotes love of horses. Especially that is very close to his name itself because Philip Sidney loved horses a lot. He was a good horseman or a good horse rider he was. And even in his works we can see so many analogies, comparisons he makes using the image of horse. Philip Sidney was an Elizabethan age period writer. We know that the beginning of English Renaissance. He was born in Kent, which is a place in England. And he was from an aristocratic family. He hails from an aristocratic family and his parents were very rich. His parents were Sir Henry Sidney and a Lady Mary Dudley. So the parents of Philip Sidney were Sir Henry Sidney and a Lady Mary Dudley. And Philip Sidney's sister was also a writer. She also showed her talent as a writer and she was a poet and a translator. Her name was Mary Sidney Hubbard, Countess of Pembroke. Remember the name? Mary Sidney Hubbard, Countess of Pembroke. The name is important because of another reason. So remember the name. And Philip Sidney's wife name was Frances Burke. Frances Burke. And remember this, his wife's name was Frances Burke. His wife's name was Frances Burke and his love interest was Penelope Davrocks. Penelope Davrocks was his love interest. Philip Sidney knew more than one language. He besides English, he also had a command over the Latin, French and Italian languages. So he knew English, Latin, French and Italian. And when we analyze the themes generally seen in his works, we can see the problems of authority and submission. And he depicts a world of bustling activity, and the psychological pressure we can see, then cultural demand, then the workings of power on literary and historical discourse. Then we can see people torn between public duty and private desire. Especially this last theme we can see in his sonnet sequence. The heroes in his sonnet sequence depict a kind of condition that is torn between public duty and private desire. This conflict we can see. So basic themes in Philip Sidney's works include problem of authority and submission, a world of bustling activity, psychological pressure, cultural demand, the workings of power on literary and historical discourse, when men torn between public duty and private desire, as seen in his heroes of his sonnet sequences. Philip Sidney also marked his presence in history, especially in the history of English literature, through another way. Rather than being a poet, he was a critic. Though he published none of his works during his lifetime, after his death only, it was known to the general public that he was a good writer. He was a scholar, of course, but as a writer, he didn't show his talent to anyone. He wrote the first work of literary criticism on English language, The Defense of Poesy, or Defense of Poetry, we can say. It was published posthumously in 1595. So this work came out only after his death. So he died in 1586. So the Defense of Poesy published in 1595. Through this work, he proved that he is also a very good literary critic. And the biography of Philip Sidney was written by Fulke Greville. Fulke Greville, who was a favorite of Queen Elizabeth. So Fulke Greville, one of his contemporaries, and also a favorite man of Queen Elizabeth. So this person, Fulke Greville, wrote the biography of the writer Philip Sidney. Or we can say even the soldier Philip Sidney. Because more than as a writer, during his lifetime, he was celebrated as a brave soldier, an ideal Renaissance man. It was at the age of 18 that Philip Sidney was elected to the Parliament as a member of Parliament for the place Shrewsbury. So only when he was 18, he got the chance to become a member of Parliament. Then after this, being appointed as a member of Parliament, he travelled to France as part of the embassy to negotiate a marriage between Elizabeth I and the French prince Duc d'Alencon, who was much younger than the Queen. So this person, Philip Sidney, he went to France in order to negotiate a marriage between Elizabeth I and the French prince Duc d'Alencon. So Duc d'Alencon was very younger to the Queen Elizabeth. So Philip Sidney advised her not to marry Duc d'Alencon. Though he went to negotiate the marriage, he was not happy about the negotiation because the French prince was very younger to Elizabeth. Elizabeth was older to the French prince. So he advised the Queen against her marriage. This created problems between Sidney and Elizabeth. Sidney's opposition to the French marriage of Elizabeth to the much younger Alencon created a problem between them. Finally, Sidney retired from the court. During the same time, he travelled to France, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy, Spain, etc. And he also met so many prominent personalities from all over these places. Another curious thing about Philip Sidney was the idea that he was the inventor of the word Pamela. Actually, the name Pamela. We know that Pamela is one of Samuel Richardson's most celebrated novels. So the name the female name Pamela was first used by Philip Sidney. He invented the name in his work Arcadia. In his work Arcadia, he first used the name Pamela, which the novelist Samuel Richardson later used for his novel. So Pamela means all sweetness. So the meaning of the name Pamela is all sweetness. And if Philip Sidney was attracted towards a girl, she was much younger person. So the much younger Penelope Davorak's inspired Philip Sidney's famous sonnet sequence of the 1580s titled Astrophil and Stella. So Philip Sidney's sonnet sequence was written inspired by the girl Penelope Davorak's. And Penelope Davorak's father actually had planned to marry his daughter to Philip Sidney, but the marriage never happened. So remember, this is important. Philip Sidney's sonnet sequence, Astrophil and Stella, was written inspired by the person Penelope Davorak's. Philip Sidney was knighted in 1583. And in 1582, Richard Hakluyt, who published accounts of English explorers and the prizes, dedicated his work Diverse Voyages touching the discoveries of America to Philip Sidney. So one person named Richard Hakluyt dedicated his book to Philip Sidney. So the book's title is Diverse Voyages touching the discoveries of America. So the work is written by Richard Hakluyt and the work is dedicated to Philip Sidney. So remember, this is important. And none of his work was published during Philip Sidney's lifetime. All his works came out only after he passed away. And published in 1590, 4 years after his death, most of his works were published by Fulke Greville and also by the Countess of Pembroke, Sidney's sister. So we know that Philip Sidney's biographer was Fulke Greville. And his sister was Mary Sidney Herbert, Countess of Pembroke. So these two people published most of his works in 1590 or after 1590. And some critics call his work the Arcadia as one of the first English novels. So some people say that the work, the Arcadia, they call this work as one of the first English novels. And the famous writer Virginia Woolf, she had mentioned the idea through the words, in the Arcadia, as in some luminous globe, all the seeds of English fiction lie latent. So Virginia Woolf, also admits that the Arcadia is one of the first English novels, because Virginia Woolf had commented that in the Arcadia, as in some luminous globe, all the seeds of English fiction lie latent. So based on such observations, we can say we owe the development of the English novel to Philip Sidney also, at least in part. And Philip Sidney's contributions, when we try to assess his finest achievement, was a sequence of 108 love sonnets. So his, the lion's share of his contributions was, in the form of sonnets. So he published in total 108 love sonnets. 108 love sonnets. These owe much to Petrarch Pierre de Ronsard. So we know Petrarch, the Italian writer, and also he was impressed by the French writer, French poet Pierre de Ronsard. So based on their sonnet sequences, Philip Sidney created his own style of writing sonnets. And he has written 108 love sonnets. So the 108 sonnet collection of Philip Sidney is titled Astrophilante Stella. Astrophilante Stella. So because of this, biggest collection after Shakespeare, we can say Philip Sidney is the greatest Elizabethan sonneteer after Shakespeare. So after Shakespeare, he became the greatest Elizabethan sonneteer by writing 108 sonnets titled Astrophilante Stella. And his sonnet sequence, 108 sonnets were written addressing Mistress Penelope d'Averox. That means Penelope d'Averox. So as we said, Penelope d'Averox was his love interest. He was in love, or they were in love, but the marriage didn't happen. So Penelope later married Lord Rich, and afterwards her name became Lady Penelope Rich. So though they didn't get married, Philip Sidney wrote sonnets addressing Penelope d'Averox. But the dedication of the sonnet was to his wife, Frances Burke. So this point you should remember very well. You shouldn't get confused. The poem sonnets were written inspired by the girl, or his love interest, Mistress Penelope d'Averox. His mistress, Penelope d'Averox, who became later Lady Penelope Rich. But the dedication of his sonnet sequence is to his wife, Frances Burke. Frances Burke. And Philip Sidney, for his sonnets, usually adopts the Petrarchan octave pattern. That means sonnets, we know that sonnets, usually a sonnet has two parts, first part and the second part. So Italian sonnet will have octave sestet format, and English sonnets will have 3 quatrain and a couplet. So he followed not the Petrarchan style blindly. He was not a blind Petrarchan follower. He used the first part of Petrarchan sonnet, A, B, B, A, B, B, A, rhyming. But the rest of the poem will be rhyming differently. Especially he used some English rhymes. So with the variations in the sestet that included the English final couplet. As we mentioned earlier, after Shakespeare's sonnets, Philip Sidney's Astrophilante Stella is considered the finest Elizabethan sonnet cycle. And Philip Sidney's work, The Defense of Poesy, introduced the critical ideals of Renaissance theorists to England. So the Renaissance ideas were added, or what we can say, the Renaissance ideas were known to the English people by Philip Sidney's work, The Defense of Poesy. Another famous writer, his contemporary, Philip Sidney's contemporary was Edmund Spenser. So Edmund Spenser dedicated the work, so Spenser's work, The Shepherd's Calendar, is dedicated to Philip Sidney. So this is important. Remember, Philip Sidney's contemporary writer was Edmund Spenser, and Spenser dedicated The Shepherd's Calendar to Philip Sidney. And after Philip Sidney's death, Edmund Spenser wrote a pastoral elegy upon the death of Sidney. So, mourning Sidney's death, Spenser wrote an elegy. And in that elegy, Spenser memorialized Philip Sidney as the flower of English manhood. So, Edmund Spenser, after Philip Sidney's death, has written the work Astrophil, which is a pastoral elegy mourning the death of Philip Sidney. So, in this work, Spenser memorialized Philip Sidney as the flower of English manhood. So, the full title of Astrophil is Astrophil, a pastoral elegy upon the death of the most noble and valorous knight, so Philip Sidney. Now let's see how Philip Sidney passed away. In a battle of Zutphen, he was shot in the thigh and died of gangrene. Gangrene means decomposition of body tissues, rotting of one's body. After especially, after a wound, when the wound gets worsened because of infection, we can say it is gangrene. So after 26 days after the battle of Zutphen, he passed away in 1586. So remember the battle name, Battle of Zutphen. And there was a story related to his death. So according to the story, while lying wounded, he gave his water to another wounded soldier. So while, being in the battle, lying wounded, he gave his water bottle to a fellow soldier. And he said, "Thy necessity is yet greater than mine." So a man was dying and Philip Sidney was wounded. So he considered the dying man's necessity, need greater than his own thirst. So he gave his water bottle to the dying man. And as he lay dying, Sidney composed a song to be sung by his deathbed. So before his death, he even composed a song to be sung by his deathbed. And Philip Sidney's epitaph, the tombstone lines are, "England has his body, for she is fed. Netherlands his blood, in her defence shed. The heavens have his soul, the arts have his fame. The soldiers his grief, the world his good name." So all praising lines. Epitaph, you see, England has his body, for she is fed. Netherlands his blood, in her defence shed. The heavens have his soul, the arts have his fame. The soldier his grief, the world his good name. We had mentioned one story related to Philip Sidney's death. And in that story, Philip Sidney gave his water bottle to a dying man. So because of this, compassion, what we can say, because of this kindness, there originated a phrase that is called Philip Sidney game. So what does the phrase Sir Philip Sidney game mean? It was the biologist John Maynard Smith who has formulated a problem known as Sir Philip Sidney game. So remember the person John Maynard Smith who came up with the idea of Sir Philip Sidney game. So what is it? It refers to the informative communication between relatives. Informative communication between relatives means we know that Philip Sidney gave water to a knight. So taking pity, or because the knight demanded water, he was dying. So he was in that terrible condition, dying condition. He was mumbling, and because of that, Philip Sidney provided him with water. So just like that, when a mother bird comes to his nest, the children, kids will cry for food. And the one who cries most will be given more food. So that is what it means, Sir Philip Sidney game, especially the connection. So the kind of communication and the understanding. So that relationship, Sir Philip Sidney game. Young birds and other animals beg for food from their parents. The parents give more food to those chicks that beg more. So there is always a connection in nature between or among the creatures for food, water, and such kind of sustenance. So this is called Philip Sidney game. So the one who communicates more for food, water, etc. will be provided with more of these things. More of food, more of water, and such things. So this is what the phrase means, Sir Philip Sidney game. So this idea was pointed out by John Maynard Smith, a famous biologist. Now let's see Philip Sidney's contribution to English language and literature. His works include, first of all, The Lady of May, then Astrophil and Stella, The Nightingale, The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia, An Apology for Poetry, The Sidney's Lambs. So these are the works written by Philip Sidney. So once more, The Lady of May, Astrophil and Stella, The Nightingale, The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia, The Apology for Poetry, The Sidney's Lambs. So that's all for today. In the next class, we will discuss one of William Shakespeare's narrative poems, Venus and Adonis.